Are you seeing anything, Carolyn?
It's now streaming live on Facebook, it says. Live on Facebook.
Okay.
Can we go ahead?
Yes, go ahead, Trudis.
Yes, good evening. After this little waiting time, we can finally start. And I would like to welcome you and especially say good evening, a bonsoir, and my usual shalom and welcome to our open book series. And today we are finally so happy to welcome to our literary salon the Canadian author, Endre Farkas. Now, you may all know him, but let me tell you a few things about him. I make it very short so that we can listen to him. He is a poet, he is a playwright, he's an author, an editor, and has been a teacher and is still teaching because he lectures about his experience. And just a few details about him. He was born in Hungary. He's a child of Holocaust survivors. They escaped in 1956 and settled in Montreal, the whole family. And he has published 11 books of poetry and plays. And his plays include Surviving Words, Haunted House. And his work has been translated into many languages, into French, Spanish, Italian, Slovenian, Turkish, and Hungarian, of course. He most recently edited, along with Caroline Marie Swade, Language Matters, interviews with 22 Quebec poets. That must be fascinating. He has read and performed widely in Canada, in the United States, in Latin America, and of course in Europe. He has collaborated with musicians, actors, and dancers, and other poets to create interdisciplinary pieces that have been performed live and on radio across Canada and Europe. His video poem, Blood is Blood, co-written and produced with Caroline Marie Swade, won first prize at the Berlin International Poetry Film Festival in 2012. You can look it up at YouTube if you give in video poem Blood is Blood by author Endre Farkas. Now for today's visit, he has chosen to speak about his work as a writer and about his book, Never Again, which was published in 2016 by Signature Editions. It is actually his first work of fiction. But before I shall let Mr. Farkas take over and ask him to tell us his story, I will announce the winner of a copy of Endre Farkas' book. And the name of the winner is Cheryl Sokolov-Novak. And now let us listen to him. He has a lot to say and a lot to tell us, and I'm looking very, very, very much forward. I wanted to give you a synopsis, but I will let him do it all. And we perhaps later on can have question and answers together. So welcome, Mr. Farkas. We're happy that you're here.
Thank you very much, Trudis, for that introduction. I'd like to also thank the Jewish Public Library for inviting me and overcoming the technical glitches to let us connect with each other, even if it's virtual. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to say hi to the Canadian Studies students in Slovenia who will be watching this tomorrow morning with the time difference. And so to them, I'd like to say Dober dan, which is hello. And to some of the Hungarian friends in Hungary who are staying up, Jó reggelt, because it'll be morning by the time you get to see this or hear this. Anyway, and maybe even later because we're starting a bit later. Yeah, Never Again is really the culmination of my work that I have done as a poet and a playwright. Not all my work has dealt with this issue of immigrant exile, anti-Semitism, innocence lost experience, but a lot of my work has, And as I was doing some research for a lecture tour I was supposed to do in April, I was surprised by how much. In fact, my first book, Servus, a poetry book, in Hungarian, it means hello, goodbye. And it was written after we escaped in 56 and then I went back in the 60s. And I wanted to say hello and goodbye to this country on my own terms, not in the terms that we were forced into during the 1956 revolution. Anyway, the story, first of all, maybe talk a little bit about the title, Never Again. Actually, Never Again was first seen as a sign in Buchenwald, April 1945. Raoul Hilberg, the Holocaust historian, says that's where it was first seen. And it has become sort of a universal call to remembrance and to, as warning, to not allow these kind of tragedies and genocides to occur. I put never and then a comma again because of the fact that in the story it happens again, or it's on the verge of, and also the fact that we still have these kind of horrors reenacted in various places where people who are different are persecuted or haunted and hunted. So I wanted the apostrophe, the comma, to sort of remind us not to forget, but also to remember that we tend to forget. So anyway, that was the beginning of that's sort of the title. The story, it's a first novel, as Trude said, and like many works of fiction, the first novel is often autobiographical or has lots of elements of the autobiographical in there. And it's true. A lot of these things did happen to me, but like in all fiction about things that happened, the author lies, makes up things, adds to it, fleshes out the skeleton, and in a sense, until the characters I based it on, moved to the background, and the characters that were created with their own backstories came to the front. So this is what I was trying to do, to tell the story from the perspective of a 7-year-old who is in a sense innocent to all that has happening and happened to his parents who are Holocaust survivors. And I'd like to start off by reading the opening passage. And one of the things, the things I really worked hard to get is because I wrote it from the 7-year-old perspective. I wanted to capture the voice, not a 70-year-old, a 65-year-old's version of a 7-year-old, but a 7-year-old's voice. And to that extent, I started the novel with a bedtime kind of story for a child. And in this little passage, I consider it kind of an overture, like in music, where all the elements of what's to come is in there, but you don't know it until later on it's revealed. So I'm going to start with this passage, which is the opening of the book. Once upon a time, a long time ago, far away, in the land of the mighty Magyars, in the county of the bold Hajdus, in the beautiful village of Békés, lived a brave young boy. And this amazingly brave young boy, in the middle of the night, zigzagged through his secret mazes to ride with the bold Hajdus into battles against the terrible Turks, manned with steely grip, and gazed the turret machine gun of his tank to heroically defend his motherland, wrestled with noble body and soul in titanic battles against the brutish red shirts, hopped rumbling trains, swam raging rivers, climbed steep mountains, and traversed treacherous prairies to see fantastic things. No enemy, terrain, or monster was too big or too dangerous to stop Tommy Wolfstein. You forgot something, Papa, he said. Ah, and Tommy Wolfstein, the most talented and famous soccer player ever known in Hungary, weaved and dribbled on the golden green to score brilliant goals for the best soccer team in the world. Tommy gave his father a sleepy smile. His father kissed Tommy on the forehead and tucked the covers around him. All you have to do is dream, my dear son. So close your eyes now and go to sleep. And so it begins by him going to sleep and then waking up to what's about to happen in Hungary. The story takes place in 56, as I said, over a period of 3 months during September, October, November, during which the Hungarian Revolution happened. And so the story deals with this evolution as Tommy, an innocent who doesn't know his parents' Holocaust background, and his parents are beginning to see in the town, the small town where they live, the rise of this kind of anti-Semitism. And he is in some, as I said, innocent of it. And here's in this passage that I'm going to read next, is really a passage of where his innocence in some way is lost about this. And it starts with him and his cousin Gabi, who he adores, having to go to Cheder. Now, for my non-Jewish friends, Cheder is the Jewish after school that kids, boys only, went to learn the Hebrew alphabet, to read and to write, and also to learn a little bit about their culture and religion. And so this passage starts off with and neither Tommy nor Gabi want to go because it's after their real school, which is the Hungarian elementary school, and so they lose time playing soccer. So they're not happy about going. So it starts off with Tommy asking his father why he has to go to Cheder. Why do I have to go? He asked his father when his parents told him that he and Gabi would be going to Cheder. Well, a long, long time ago, when I was young, your age, his father said, I would go with my papa, may he rest in peace, to the synagogue every Saturday to pray. The synagogue was so beautiful, especially on the high holidays. The women, including your grandmother, may she rest in peace, washed the floors of the synagogue so clean that you could eat off them. They cleaned the windows so clean that you'd swear that there was no glass in them. They polished the silver candelabras so bright you didn't need candles in them. The men trimmed the lawn so fine that Pushkash, that great soccer player, would have begged to play on it. And every year they gave the walls a new coat of yellow paint, so yellow that the sunflowers bowed their heads in their honor. I was so happy standing next to my papa, listening to the cantor sing the Kol Nidre. He sang it so beautifully, the notes rose like doves. They made you look up to the sky blue dome with its sparkling golden stars and made you believe you were looking at the sky over Jerusalem, the real home of the Jews, a long, long time ago. And on Rosh Hashanah, all the Jews from the village and the surrounding farms came and filled the synagogue so full that you could not move. In those days, lots of Jewish families lived in and around Bekesh. Everyone was dressed in their New Year best. The girls came in their prettiest dresses and fanciest hats, and the boys in their most starched and ironed shirts, finest holiday suits, and spit and polish boots. My sister, your Aunt Margaret, and I were also there in our best patched hand-me-downs. Why were you so poor? God knows. Somebody had to be rich, somebody had to be poor. We were the chosen. But we weren't the only ones. There were enough of us poor to form our own congregation if we had wanted to. I loved Yom Kippur. I was happy on Yom Kippur because it was the one day of the year we were equal to every other Jewish family. It's, as you know, the only day when everybody has to fast, not just the poor. On that day, on the Day of Atonement, everybody goes without food. And as much as I loved hearing the shofar end the fast, I was sad because the rich, with their overflowing larders, always went home to eat a big, big, big meal, while we only had chicken soup without the chicken. But we were proud to be Haidu Jews. For us, it wasn't the Haidus who made Bakish famous. For us, it was our synagogue and Rabbi Stern. Your Rabbi Stern's father, may he rest in peace. When he gave his sermon, it was so quiet you could hear a leaf fall. He was also renowned and respected for his wisdom. People would come from all over Hungary to ask our rabbi for advice, even other rabbis, even the Gentiles. Imagine. Families from all over Hungary sent their sons to study with him, even from Budapest. There were so many students that a big classroom had to be built. I wanted to go to Cheder and hear what he had to say and maybe become a wise rabbi, but we were too poor. And then the war happened. But now you have a chance to learn from his son, who is also wise. So I want you to go listen and learn so you can grow up to be a wise man. A wise man is a rich man, and that kind of wealth nobody can take away from you. So then he goes off to the Cheder, and he and Gabi are standing around in the Cheder, around outside and talking. Why do we have to waste our time learning about people with stupid names like Ezekiel, Ishmael, and Nebuchadnezzar, who lived a long time ago in faraway places that don't exist anymore? I don't want to be a rabbi. I want to be a soccer player like Pushkash. And I want to be like Grushic, especially this afternoon. It was going to be Tommy's first game on the school field, his first game with real nets. Yeah, stupid Cheder, Tommy says, as he puts on his yarmulke. He hadn't heard Rabbi Stern come up behind him and is taken by surprise when the rabbi slaps him on the back of the head. Ouch! It's you who are stupid, the rabbi says, and shepherds the boys into the classroom. Now sit and try to learn something. It's the second time Tommy had been slapped on the back of the head today. He wants to slap somebody. Rabbi Stern was small. His dark eyes could burn holes into his students when he looked at them. His fiery cheeks were always flushed. He had a thick mustache, a large bushy beard, and smelly tobacco breath. Cheder classes are held in Rabbi Stern's house next to the old synagogue, which was now dilapidated. During the week, the dining room serves as the classroom, and on Saturdays and high holidays, it becomes the synagogue. It has a low ceiling with small windows that makes the room dark no matter what time of day it is. He keeps the Torah in the kitchen cupboard. Each class begins with a recitation of the Hebrew alphabet. Holding a cigarette between his fingers, waving it like a baton, Rabbi Stern keeps time. As he does, he circles the table, palm at the ready for a quick slap on the back of the head to any boy who mispronounces or doesn't know the letters. Both Tommy and Gabi had been recipients of such slaps, but often it is Yossel, the rabbi's own son, the only one beside Rabbi Stern with earlocks and who always wears a yarmulke and a tzitzis, who gets the most and hardest whacks, even though he hardly makes any mistakes. Yossel is reading. And I come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land onto the good land, and a large one onto a land flowing with milk and honey, onto the place of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Jebusite. When Gabi puts up his hand, the rabbi is pleased. Yes? I have to go to the bathroom. He glares at Gabi. Sit down. Gabi squeezes his knees together. He pinches his face into a look of desperation. But Rabbi, I really have to go. The rabbi shakes his head with displeasure. He doesn't want to let him out, but he also doesn't want an accident in his class. So you couldn't go before? Your bladder is suddenly like the walls of Jericho about to burst? He heaves a sigh. So go, but hurry back. Yes, Rabbi, Gabi says and hurries out. So continue, he commands his son with a whack on the head. He ambles back to his stuffed fauteuil and sits interlocking his fingers over his stomach. He leans back, closes his eyes, and listens as Yossel continues his reading. As soon as Tommy hears the first audible snores, he quietly slides off the bench and tiptoes toward the door. The other boys watch as he slowly opens it, trying to keep it from creaking. Yossel smiles at him and continues reading his passage a bit louder. Tommy smiles back and eases out, closing the door quietly behind him. Outside, he runs towards the outhouse, which, like most, is located as far away from the main house as possible. The Cheder smelly fly-infested outhouse is next to the chicken coop and across the lane from the real school. He ducks behind it. He can hear the shouts of Frog, Istvan, Gabi, and the other regulars. He squeezes through the broken slats on the fence and runs across the alley to join them on the field. So he sneaks out and he goes to play with the other boys. Just a little bit of background here, setting again. His best friend, his name is Frog. He's a gypsy boy, and he, like Tommy, is one of the sort of unchosen in the Hungarian scheme of things. And he's also called Frog for a reason, because he often travels with a frog in his shirt pocket. Why he has that is revealed later in the story, but I'll maybe talk about that later. Okay, so here's the game that unfolds and in a sense becomes a moment of loss of innocence for Tommy. Tommy has scored a couple of Puskás-like goals, and Gabi has made a couple of his Grosic Panthers leap saves. His team is leading when Seles, who is the school bully, and Tommy has already had a run-in with him, and his gang shows up. They stop at the touchline and watch. Istvan lobs a pass towards Tommy for a head and run. As he speeds towards it, looking up at the ball, Tommy feels a foot across his ankle, and suddenly he's tumbling. He hears laughing. He looks up and sees Seles with one foot on the ball, arms crossed, grinning like a warrior chief who has conquered an opponent. The baby still can't walk. We're gonna play. You Jew boys can even have those stinking gypsies on your team. He flashes a mean-looking smile. Tommy knows there's no choice about not letting them play. Seles and his gang play rough and dirty. They shove, elbow, and deliberately step on the gypsy boys' bare feet. Only Gabi's brilliant goaltending keeps them in the game. Frog has the ball at midfield. Just before getting knocked over, he passes the ball to Carrot, who's another friend of Tommy's, who sends a lead pass to Tommy. He takes it on his instep and dribbles over to the right side. He sees Seles charging. Jew, Jew, dirty Jews eat dirt, Seles shouts as he gallops towards Tommy. You can do it. You can do it. He can see Seles's mean eyes glowing and his wide grin and big teeth. Tommy spreads his arms, leans back as if he were flying, gets his foot under the ball and kicks it as hard as he can. Seles rises onto his toes. His eyes widen and a high-pitched yell escapes from his gaping mouth. He is still and stiff as a statue. Then in one motion, his knees buckle, his hands grasp his groin, and he falls face down onto the ground with a thud. He lies there. Tommy is scared. Maybe he killed him. Everybody gathers around Seles. After what seems like forever, slowly he rolls onto his back. He lies there, hands at his groin, eyes and mouth wide open, desperately trying to breathe. A loud sob escapes from his mouth. A gob of snot flies from his nose and lands in his mouth. You did that on purpose, yells one of Seles's gang and takes a step toward Tommy. Tommy stiffens and clenches his fists. Just then, a throaty burp startles everyone into silence. Something flies out of Frog's pocket. It makes a beautiful arc through the air before landing smack in the middle of Seles's face. Get it off me, Seles croaks, slapping at his own face. Even Seles's friends have to laugh. Tamás, Gabor, the angry voice cuts through the yelling and laughing. Everyone turns. It's Rabbi Stern, standing on the other side of the fence by the outhouse, wagging his finger at them. You get back here, right now. And that's that sequence. So, excuse me. So that is the one of the first experiences that Tommy has in being told that he's different, that he's not a true Hungarian. And in the story, it's revealed that not only this is in the child's world, that this anti-Semitism and persecution exists, but it's really a microcosm of what's growing in the country itself. I have another passage to read, but before I do that, if there's any question that Trudis you might want to ask, I'd be glad to take a few seconds or a few minutes to answer it, or do you want me to finish and then you'll ask?
Well, you know, we started while we had this little time before really starting our conversation here, where I had mentioned already to you, and you explained it also in the beginning, why to choose the perspective of a child to basically reveal part also of your experiences, because Tommy seems to share a lot with you personal, at least I thought so. Thinking myself about my childhood in post-war Germany and being a very different kind of a victim at that time. And with you, I mean, the passages which you have just read, they're very clearly showing the perspective of a child's world, of his friendships, of his assessment of friends, of his disappointment. Why? And it's your first novel, because you're a poet. Normally you write poetry. Why was it so important to spare the voice of the parents for that boy, for Tommy, for you yourself, because there is this semi-autobiographical touch in there, I feel. Why was that so important to spare them out? At least the parts you have read now show it very clearly. It could be any child. It could be any child at any time experiencing that. It's
well, partly because, I mean, I felt that in some ways you're right about it being autobiographical, as I've said, and I do remember a lot of what went on, and it's very vivid because it happened in very physical ways. For example, I was starting grade 1, as Tommy is, and being kind of a nerdish or loving my mother instilled in me as a child a love of stories, poetry. She recited poetry to me. She loved reciting the poetry of the Hungarian poets. And I learned, because my cousin was a year ahead of me, I learned the alphabet before my classmates. So I went in already knowing, and so I became a teacher's pet. And then what happened was, as the revolution turned dark and ugly in the town we lived, I went to class one day, and my teacher said, brought me to the front of the class and said to the class, "Look at this. Here's the face of a traitor Jew to Hungary. Now get out." And I got kicked out of school by a teacher I was her pet and I adored. And then this happened just like that. So I wanted there have been a lot of stories, novels about an adult experience of what went on. And I thought this would be a fresh perspective and in some ways more dramatic because it's happening to a child. You know, that was part of it. But the story, my parent, or Tommy's parents' story does come in. Tommy's mother was in Auschwitz. Tommy's father was in Mauthausen. And there are, as they're trying to escape, there are flashbacks to that. But I really wanted this child's perspective, which a child doesn't philosophize, doesn't analyze, doesn't psychoanalyze what's going on. He experiences. And so a lot of what I wrote about it was like a action story. And one of my favorite child's stories is a Hungarian book called The Pal Street Boys, which is it's a classic, now it would be called a young adult novel, but it's about a group of young boys and two gangs fighting for territory in Budapest. And I loved the narrative, which was from the youngest member of this group. So these were some of the elements in there. And so in a way that it's also what I knew best, from my voice, my experience, to put it into that 7-year-old's voice.
Okay.
So if you want, I will now, then the final piece I will read is actually the father's experience of liberation from Mauthausen. Is that okay? All right. Okay. Shani's liberation, Shani is Tommy's father. Shani's liberation arrived unannounced. There was no fierce battle, no explosion of shells, no rumbling tanks tearing down barbed wire fences, no blasting of trumpets, no waving of flags, no cheering of prisoners at the sight of liberating Allied soldiers. Shani's liberation came in absolute silence while he was asleep. It was announced by an absence of the morning martial music, by an absence of barking dogs, by an absence of guards banging open barrack doors, yelling at them to get up. Out of habit, Shani rose and emerged from his bunk at the first light of day. What day? He didn't know. He had lost track of days, months, and years. He had a sense of hours, but that was only because of the sundial one of his bunkmates had made, a stick stuck in the barren earth in front of their bunks. It was a small act of rebellion that gave them hope. Like the others, he shuffled into his roll call position and waited and waited. But there was no roll call. Every morning, for however long he had been here, he and the others had been told when to wake, where to stand, where to go, when to eat, what to do, and when to sleep. Now standing here, guardless, he waited. Shani thought he was dreaming. He looked up at the towers. They were empty. There were no guards trained on them, guns trained on them. The camp gate was wide open, and there was silence. He waited to wake up. As he stood there, he also became aware of the others standing next to him, also waiting. He became conscious of thinking. Were they part of his dream? Dreaming and thinking were alien acts. He hadn't done either for what seemed like forever. No, it wasn't a dream. He was awake. He was thinking. What was going on? Was this the way they were going to be killed? Were the guards waiting for them to move before they came out of hiding and opened fire? He dared not move a muscle. He waited. It seemed that everyone became conscious of their freedom simultaneously. The realization that there were really no guards, that the camp now belonged to them, came like a slap. Some skeletons sat down and started crying. Some broke ranks and in slow motion shuffled off in all directions. Some headed toward the bakery, drawn by the heat and smell, emerging with loaves of bread in their arms, tearing off pieces and stuffing them in their mouths, or sitting on the ground, rocking their loaves like babies. Some broke into the food pantry, that forbidden heaven, gorging themselves on whatever they found. Shani saw skeletons with raised handfuls of sugar opening their mouths, wide open, and letting it cascade into their mouth. Others had fistfuls of lard that they were licking like ice cream. Men were drinking ladle and ladlefuls of milk. Shani watched them collapse in writhing agony. On the day of their liberation, he saw many die from being free. Shani wandered around the camp aimlessly, not quite believing, but still savoring his freedom. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to not see, hear, or talk to anyone. He wanted silence, something impossible the day before. He entered the officer's mess. The abandoned room was set for breakfast. Immaculate white tablecloths draped the tables. On them, like attendants, servants, all with the swastika insignia. All perfectly aligned, were plates, cups waiting to be filled, knives, forks waiting to carve into sausages, ham, and fresh eggs, and napkins waiting to dab satisfied mouths. He reached for a cup, but immediately stopped, afraid to touch it. He looked around, waiting to be slapped, but the dining hall was empty. Slowly, he sat down, opened, and carefully placed a napkin on his lap. He lifted a sugar cube out of one of the pewter bowls. He put it in between his lips, closed his eyes, and sighed with pleasure as it dissolved. The rush of sweetness overwhelmed him. He held onto the table. When he had gathered his strength again, he stood up and slowly walked to the door. He found himself in another room with a large kitchen table in the center that had on it crystal glass vase filled with lilacs. Red polka dot curtains covered the windows. In one corner, next to the polka dot curtains, was a bookshelf and a record player. He stepped into the other room. He paused and sighed. At the far end was a large bed with a thick, fluffy duvet. He longed to be enveloped in the feathery softness. He caught sight of someone at the far end of the room. He squinted and saw a man with sunken cheeks, the skin on his bones drawn tight as a drum skin. The man's pajama pants were too big, and like him, he was holding them up by the drawstrings. He too was moving toward the bed. Shani called out to him, and the man called back. Shani raised his hand to warn him off, to tell him that this was his bed, but the man also waved to claim him the bed. Shani made a run for it, just as the other man decided to do the same. When he finally realized he was looking into a mirror, he fainted. Excuse me, that drama. So that's the moment of liberation, which apparently, my father told me, did happen in Mauthausen, that the Germans abandoned the camp in the middle of the night before the Allied showed up. And it was like a surreal world for these people, these survivors, who suddenly, after years of being there, and in a sense, their right to think, to be individuals, were stripped from them. And then it's sort of like the coming back to consciousness. He didn't quite explain it that way, but this is what I got out of it, and then translated it into this particular scene.
Mm-hmm. What touched me before when you read of Tommy, the experience in the class where he was teacher's pet, and with a quick change became the étranger, the stranger, the hated Jew, all of a sudden. Now, the portrayal of Jews seen through the eyes of the child, of Tommy, of this young boy, how is that portrayed? Is there a variety of, I mean, that was a terrible scene there, because here's the young boy who is suddenly made the outsider in front of classmates. How is the general portrayal? And it has something to do with you too. I mean, you grew up here, eventually in Canada. You said before, when we were waiting to be tuned in, that you went back to Hungary a few times. So with it comes also the question of your relationship to your homeland and to the portrayal of Jewish people at that time, and in your book, the way it has found a place in your book, because it's the first book of fiction. Yes. So for us post-war generational people, there is a broken relationship to our homeland. And
Yes.
I would like to know a bit more about your portrayal of Jews in the novel and your perception of them within your country and in your horizon, more or less.
Yeah, there is a variety. Tommy's father and mother are both survivors, and they survived in different ways. Tommy's father's survival was through his wit and skill at wheeling and dealing in the camps. And when he came back, he still had faith, but he wasn't really a very strong practicing Jew. Gabi's father was an out and out atheist in the novel, where he has a very big fight with the rabbi, Tommy's teacher, when the rabbi comes to complain about the kids skipping school and going to play soccer. And they have a very violent, not physical, but a verbal debate about Gabi's father asking, where was God all the while this was going on? And the rabbi trying to answer, saying that it's a mystery and God knows, like we have to accept God's will. So there's that kind of a conflict. And Tommy himself didn't think of himself as a Jew until these things started to happen. And then suddenly he was forced to think, he wanted to be a great Hungarian soccer player, which most Jews would not be that, So there this kind of a conflict, ignorance, and then slowly as the story progresses, his understanding of what it means to be a Jew culminates in when they're in Budapest, hiding out or in the safe house of the big synagogue in Budapest, and while waiting to escape. And his father, he falls asleep and he sees his father when he wakes, walking towards him, wearing his tallis over his head, and striding down the alleyway of the corridor. And he looks, and Tommy thinks he looks like a knight, in his robe. And suddenly his mother tells him, well, you and your father are Cohens, which is the priest tribe, but also the knights, the fighters of the Jews. So he begins to have that experience, and he experiences in that synagogue. There's a museum on the second floor where there's the display of the Holocaust, some of the things that were done to Jews in Hungary. And he sees that and he doesn't understand what it's all about, but he senses something, right? So anyway, those are the kind of, that's the range of the different kind of Jewish experiences. And my own, when we came to Canada, we escaped in '56. And when we came here, my father started telling stories about what happened to him during the war. He was constantly talking about it. He never stopped. My mother never talked about it. She, that's, I think, classic. And one will talk about it, one will not talk about it. And, when my parents' friends, the other landsmen, the Hungarians who came out in '56 got together, it was always the stories about that, how each one experienced that. And I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to be Canadian. I wanted to play soccer. I wanted to eat hot dogs. I wanted to have I didn't care whether my girlfriend was Jewish or not Jewish. And of course, all this caused pain for my parents in various ways. But when I was in university and I went back to Hungary, I remember feeling a knot in my stomach, I realized I had, and I think in some ways still have, a love and hate relationship to that place. It's my birthland, but it's not I don't consider it my homeland. And I have very good friends in Hungary right now who are about my age, who were children as well at that time. And they are, of all persuasions. And with them, I feel a kinship. I don't feel any animosity. They understand, and they themselves are sensitive to it. But I also experience I've a number of times experienced where that dark side, the underbelly of Hungary's right-wing extreme, not just anti-Semitism, but just, I remember meeting somebody in 2016 who had bought he was a flower vendor who, because I bought some flowers and he heard that I was Hungarian, but I wasn't Hungarian. My accent and my stumbling gave me away. Decided to talk to me, and he decided to, it ended up him lecturing me and I'm listening, where at that time there were a lot of the Syrians coming from there to Hungary, and Hungary was trying to keep them out. And the propaganda was, and he was the mouthpiece for that propaganda, saying, well, those people, they come here and they don't do anything and they take our money, right? Next breath, oh, those people, they come here and they take away all our jobs and attack our women. And then he said, but you know who the real problem is? George Soros, because it's him who pays them to come here and to impurify us Hungarians.
Mm-hmm.
So all I could say to him at the end of that is shalom, and walked away, because I couldn't talk Hungarian well enough to want to kill him. But there was this kind of and this hasn't gone away. In fact, I've heard from my relatives who are still in Hungary that this is encouraged. There's that kind of attitude. So Hungary for me is both the place, there's part of me that always has that love for that place, because I was born there. I had some early childhood memories that were wonderful. And then the other stuff. So it's I guess in some ways you could say it's a bipolar relationship between me and this land. And it's a sense of, I think many people experience this when they're exiled, not immigrants, but forced out of their place. No matter, I've been here since 56, but part of me feels like an exile. I have family here, I have children here, I have friends here, but yet I know there's something, and sometimes my mind switches over to a few words in Hungarian, but so there's this kind of a dilemma. And in some ways, I've been trying to work it out in my work for a long time. And hopefully maybe it'll resolve through these novels and through other works of art that I create.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have, but just a quick question. The novel, the book has been translated in Hungarian, I guess?
No, it's actually being considered for translation.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Because I would be very interested then, in a second session perhaps, how it was received, and it has to do with the younger generation now. How well are they informed about your parents' history, about their history towards their Jewish compatriots, because in Germany, where I come from the Cologne region, it's a very different kind of teaching, because the Germans were the perpetrators. It's the darkest part of our history. So to teach those generation after the war what had happened and never stop to tell them to keep memory alive, which is important. And that has been dealt with very differently in Austria. And immediately I was thinking about Hungary.
Yeah. Well, in Hungary, not strangely enough, but there's two sides. One side, some people I've met, they said, well, let's not stir the pot. Others, very strongly, they will not be quiet if they see anything that smells, looks, or feels like the rising of this kind of, which it is rising. So, and partly because the outside Hungary community is supportive of the Hungarian Jewish people there. They are they speak up, they speak out, and they definitely want to tell people never again.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah. So there is an effort. Do we have to finish now, Maria? You are going. Yeah, I think we made it in the end. After all, we were not sure. There is the book. Just lift it up again.
my
Never.
publisher will be happy.
And and it is never, comma, again. That punctuation is of great importance. We want to thank you for having come to us, for introducing the book and your history and your story with us. I hope you will be going teaching and lecturing wherever you go and speak about things you have written down. I want to thank also again the staff in the Jewish Public Library for inviting you and for continuing to introduce Canadian authors. So I wish you very, very, very good luck with the translation. And then we have to meet and you tell us how was it received in Hungary and what did people feel about that perspective of a young boy who at one point in his young life lost his innocence. So I thank you again very much. I thank Maria, Roxana, and the staff of the Jewish Public Library for having invited you to us.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to the Jewish Public Library for inviting me. And to everyone, I wish them safe times.